Hello, my name is Lorenz Silva. I am attending the University of Strathclyde and currently in the International Social Welfare Program. This is my presentation for the International Social Welfare Themes and Perspectives course. Today my presentation is going to be on how globalization affects social welfare, particularly the welfare of immigrants. A key theme in social work is how globalization is shaping policies and practices. Globalization is a result of technological advancements that have shrunken the world, meaning that instant communication and transportation has made it easier for people, organizations, and countries to connect with one another. It has entwined politics, economies, and societies, creating a collective to improve the world and limit the power of one individual nation holding each other accountable to an agreement. As globalization progresses, the creation and intervention of non-governmental organizations marks the establishment of human rights. The UN's agreement constitutes that all humans are entitled to basic protection and standard of living beyond any national border and serves as a standard for social welfare and practices. Along with those protections, the Declaration of Human Rights also protects human dignity, civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, going beyond just the basic necessities for living. It demands the political and social recognition and representation of those that are typically not in positions of power. The concept of human rights is a guide for social workers to deconstruct some of the systemic social injustices that affect marginalized communities. Despite the goal of setting standards of human rights, sometimes capitalism is also able to overshadow such important issues for the sake of upholding the economic relationships between individual governments and companies. One particular area within the welfare state I would like to focus on is the lack of support and mistreatment that immigrants are receiving. The political rhetoric surrounding immigration and asylum seekers tends to be severely negative and xenophobic. It is often used to justify discrimination against immigrants to defund and end policies and practices meant to protect their rights. In addition to negative rhetoric, some of the policies are inherently set up for immigrants to fail. For example, under the Trump administration, the Immigration and Service Agency was tasked to drop their congressional duties to assist ICE in rounding up immigrants, prolonging an already lengthy citizenship process, all while immigrants face the fear of deportation and in greater need of living necessities. The Department of Homeland Security implemented stricter regulations on the public charge rule to include more government assistance programs, such as Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and Medicaid, to establish immigrants as a public charge, or in other terms, a drain on the system. Those that are deemed or potentially deemed a public charge are then considered ineligible for residency. This rule was implemented to target immigrants, as it was estimated that about half of them used government assistance programs during the time. This rule violates the rights of impoverished immigrants because most often than not, they are trying to improve their families' lives in a country that they perceive will have better opportunities for their families, but simply can't because they are poor. One of the biggest issues surrounding immigration and refugee policies is the inhumane separation of children and families. In particular, the Trump administration has separated so many children from their families, and even worse, have lost over 500 children under the custody of the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE. Over 100 countries like the UK, Australia, and Canada are known for detaining immigrant children for migration reasons, despite the criticism it has received for violating children's rights. In 2007, the American Academy of Pediatrics reported that the basic standards of care for immigrant children in detention centers were not met. Egregious conditions in processing centers included inadequate bathing and toilet facilities, constant light exposure, children sleeping on the concrete floors, confiscation of belongings, insufficient food, denial of access through medical care, lack of mental health support, plus physical and emotional maltreatment. Health assessments are performed without parental presence and medical history. Prolonged forced separation from caregivers contributes to the stress on children's mental health. Chronic stress has proven to change the hormonal imbalance of people, having an exceptional impact on the overall health and development of children. Children enduring chronic stress have estimated 20-year reduction in life expectancy. Long separation also causes attachment issues between families, leaving children with the feeling of abandonment and hostility towards authority figures or their parents. Some countries, like Canada, have been better about protecting children by trying to keep children with their mothers in separate detention centers while in custody. While this is good for some families, it reinforces traditional gender roles of mothers being the primary caretaker of children. While it is more acceptable for women to fill this role, it does not mean that men fill this role. As parental leave in first world countries become more implemented and accepted, immigrants and asylum-seeking fathers in these countries deserve to have the same time with their children. Fathers deserve to have their children in these hard, unknowing situations, just like their mothers do. Men's parental rights must be advocated for to protect the mental health and well-being of himself and the children. As previously mentioned, globalization also allowed for people and communities to come together and create organizations that have a commitment to protecting human rights. Examples of some organizations are the United Nations, which is held in high regards for its collaborative work, and the Black Lives Matter organization that has gotten momentum to create awareness of systemic injustices that Black people are forced to endure. These organizations continue to influence social welfare policies and to resolve some of the systemic and social barriers that vulnerable populations experience. They strive to raise welfare standards and practices that have historically disenfranchised certain communities through policies. Valtonen explains that in countries where the state is a minor actor in welfare provisions, the responsibility for generating welfare and the well-being is distributed across the non-public, non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and informal sectors, including the family. Immigrants and refugees who are settling in this latter type of system must link into the existing non-state structures, which are heavily grounded in and organized at the level of community and its collectivities. Settlement processes in some societies thus involve intensive interfacing with the existing range of public services. While in these societies, a wider spread of welfare mix immigrants and refugees build direct and multiple linkages with organized services in society. NGOs and the private sector have literally stepped up to support immigrants by contributing funds, providing housing, food, and employment for those in need. This greatly alleviates the workload on the welfare state. Collaboration between agencies and organizations is needed to be more frequent to properly guide immigrants in the correct sources that they need. First, social workers need to start listening to the needs of immigrants to start amplifying these needs to policymakers. Cultural sensitivity must be practiced while dealing with immigrants to ensure that social workers are respecting the client's culture and gaining a deeper understanding of that culture. This practice enables social workers to build trusting relationships with clients. This is important because most immigrants fleeing probably harbor a lot of mistrust for government workers because of past experiences. Trust is essential for opening up to address any concerns that immigrants might be facing, such as food insecurity, poor housing conditions, unemployment, and etc. Immigrants are entitled to humanities and deserve to have their voices heard. No one should have to experience food insecurity or homelessness, especially after leaving their homes for better opportunities. Trust is extremely valuable, especially for immigrants, so in order for social workers to build trust in relationships, it is ideal that they are checking in a reasonable amount of time, taking the time to listen to their needs, and most importantly, giving immigrants times to actually build that trust. Second, social workers need to communicate these needs with policymakers and collaborate on making more effective policies to help immigrants. I believe that one important thing about this communication that isn't commonly talked about is social workers have the ability to share immigrants' experiences to make policymakers more empathetic to immigrants. Empathetic policies also extend further out into society, changing some of the perspectives about immigrants and ultimately weakening oppression. Social workers should amplify the voices of immigrants because their needs must be heard. Host countries have the opportunity to reduce further harm of asylum-seeking and refugee families by developing post-migration policies, process and environments at individual, family, and community levels that are trauma-informed and protective. This includes access to culturally competent psychological and psychiatric support where necessary for children developmentally impacted by trauma. At the family level, the reunification of children and their parents must be prioritized and expedited with ongoing support for their families to remain intact. And at the community level, asylum claims must be resolved as quickly as possible to enable stable settlement and integration. Protracted bureaucratic process instability, delays, and frequent relocation negatively impact parents' and children's mental health. The third is collaborations with non-governmental organizations. While some countries might not have the funding to support all the resources that immigrants need, the use of NGOs can supplement some of the needed resources. Social workers should be the bridge to many resources for immigrants. Along with supplementing resources, NGOs might also specialize in some of the services that are provided by the welfare state. That are not provided by the welfare state. Immigrants might also have more trust in these organizations since they're not federal, or might be more culturally sensitive to their particular situation. The potential for entrusting NGO workers with the burdens of immigration also allows another credible person to amplify the voices of immigrants. More supervision for the care of immigrants increases the likelihood to acknowledge any issues that may arise. If agencies collaborated together to discuss the overall concerns and needs of the client as a whole, I believe that it can make significant strides in the care for immigrants. So one example that I wanted to get to that isn't necessarily collaborative work is the example of this NGO amplifying the voices of immigrants. So back in 2009, Italy enacted a provision of the so-called security package, which obliged doctors working for public health care services, primarily hospitals, to report to the police any immigrants requiring medical care who were not able to produce a valid residency document. Similar to the situation in the Netherlands, NGO advocacy groups and health officials began to mobilize national protest against the identifying of immigrants for deportation purposes while trying to receive medical assistance. Meanwhile, NGOs played a vital role in local health services for immigrants, especially in the regions with restrictive regulations on healthcare, despite the lack of public support, and criticism. One NGO in particular that has provided free healthcare to immigrants is NAGA, and they combine the direct services with political activism and legal action. Every year, NAGA provides approximately 15,000 health services, about 80 per day, ranging from basic to specialized medicine, as well as mobilizing their services to reach clients that may not have the capabilities to travel or struggle accessing governmental assistance. NGOs hold governmental policymakers and social workers accountable for the supervision and treatment for immigrants that have been grossly neglected. There needs to be checks and balances in place to protect the human rights. So with that said, if governments aren't able to fund these services, then NGOs are able to supplement that and help with that assistance. And the fourth thing that is needed in supporting immigrants is to achieve their own goals. A perfect example is that the U.S. was founded and built on the backs of immigrants. Some, like Sergey Brin, who is the founder of Google, Madeleine Albright, a U.S. ambassador to the UN, and what she's mostly known for is the first woman to be a U.S. Secretary of State. And Ilhan Omar, one of the U.S. House Representatives, they all have had the opportunity to change the world we know. So giving them access to education and entrepreneurial opportunities has the capability to further improve the world. So they shouldn't be denied the opportunities like these amazing people were. I believe that if we truly want to make the world a better place for everyone, or even just ourselves, we need to support the most vulnerable people's needs. We need to take a bottom-up approach, because if their lives improve, then everyone else should as well. Every human is entitled to safety, respect, and the right to pursue happiness. If not, then what is the point of life? What is the point of social welfare if capitalism and xenophobia are more important than the lives that it's meant to protect? Witch hunts and residency deterrent policies need to be removed from governments globally. Maltreatment and neglect of immigrants must be acknowledged globally so we can hold government officials accountable for their actions. Social workers should be at the forefront of this change. They need to start actively listening and building trusting relationships with their clients to understand the challenges that immigrants endure, to better address and support overcoming said challenges. Sharing these challenges with policymakers can also support immigrants at a systemic level. Changing policies makes strides in the amount of funding allocated towards the welfare of immigrants, mitigates prejudice in institutions and society, and most importantly, ends discriminatory policies meant to further disenfranchise immigrants. Community collaboration is needed to execute a holistic approach to support immigrants, as well as increasing their ability to access support services. So, yeah, globalization has significantly impacted migration and migration policies, and so we need to make sure that immigrants are protected because they're humans and they deserve their right to be protected.